Got it.
Good
Okay.
morning, guys.
Good
Well,
morning.
good afternoon.
Okay, I'm going to ask everyone to mute, and then we'll speak after. We have the last 10 minutes that we can all connect. But I want to welcome you all to our third webinar with Rabbi Pesach Wolicki. And it's been a way for us to all to get together and get caught up on the news and just kind of have some time together, which is really important. But today I also want to announce something exciting that we're about to embark on. It's called the Power. I'm sorry, and this is my board member who can never find. Can you send him the link? I'm going to send him the link in a moment. It's called the Power of Together. And what this program is going to be, it's going to be fun. It's going to be educational. It's going to allow us all to fight this fight against Hamas as a group. And we're going to fight them on social media. We're going to fight them on the regular media. We're going to work in teams of 5. And those are not your heroes to heroes teams of 5. They will be teams that'll be put together. It'll be vets, it'll be civilians, it will be all kinds of volunteers, some college students.
Trying to get on this meeting with
and
you.
Linda, I'm going to mute you.
I'm on.
And so what you're going to do is, in these teams of 5, should you like to join, you're going to come up with memes, you're going to come up with videos, you're going to come up with postings to post to social media, and each teams will be competing against one another. And each week we're going to give out prizes for the posts that received the most comments, likes, shares. And we want to get this message out. And it can be anything from a positive message of faith, the truth about different truths about the war. They can be funny, they can be entertaining, but they have to be truthful. And they will also have to be approved, and they'll be put in a Power of Together Heroes to Heroes frame, and you will be able to send them out, push them through your networks. Ideally, they go viral. Now, the way we're doing this, you do not have to be a social media guru. You don't have to be. We'll be working off, every team will have access to Canva to create and, allow you to do whatever editing you need to do. You may have someone on your team that doesn't know social media, but knows how to write or knows how to do video, but you'll all work together to make these videos and to tell the real story. And that way we can support our heroes who are waiting, our IDF heroes who are waiting online to go into Gaza or up north, wherever they may be, and their families. And we can help teach the truth here in the United States. We have college kids who are supporting terrorism. So it's time to educate them. It's time to really fight this war here in the United States. We are all interested in educating our children. We're interested in our freedom. We're interested in liberty. This is the time to let people know, interested in faith and, getting rid of anti-Semitism, getting rid of anti-Christianity, getting, all of that. We've got a lot of wars to fight here. And, so there are a lot of fronts to fight this. But if you are interested, text, and my email, Judy@Heroes2Heroes, send me an email, send me a text. Hey, I'm interested, and we'll get you. I just need your email, but most of you I have. If you're new to us, send me your email, your mobile number, and we will get you on teams, and the teams will start forming next week, and we'll get the program started the week after, and we'll get the contest started.
Judy, if you need some videos or information or something like that, I have tons of videos I can send you.
Okay, well, we're looking for creative, so we're not gonna repost other videos. So just to give people ideas, that they can
Yes,
create,
exactly.
there's some fun stuff out there. So if you could send those, that they would be great,
Yeah.
because people are actually watching those.
So that's what some of my friends are doing that in the IDF. So I have tons of their videos with information and everything. So I can send it to you.
Great, thank you so much. We'll make sure every team has them. Okay, now without just some ground rules for today. Rabbi Wolicki has a list of questions. He's going to go through those questions. And if you have other questions, please put them in the chat, because we're gonna just try to keep moving this forward. Okay, so with no further ado, I just would like to introduce Rabbi Pesach Wolicki, who's a co-host of Shoulder to Shoulder, and whose whole life is dedicated to bridging Jews and Christians, helping us understand one another and bringing us to places like where we are today. So I'd just like to welcome Rabbi Wolicki, and I'd also like to say at the end, we're going to say, we'd like to add a psalm, and keeping especially your 4 children and all of those we know and love who are on the front lines, keeping them safe. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Judy. Now, we're not going to get through all the questions just like last week, and I will also work off of questions from last week's list that I didn't get to yet. And so if you submitted a question for this week and I don't get to it, it might be in a subsequent webinar. We're going to keep this conversation going throughout the war. But the first question on the list is really just for an update on where things stand. Now, if you've been watching the news, been following what's going on, what's happening is that Israel has still not launched its ground invasion in earnest. They're still doing a lot of bombing of targets from the air. And whether the delay in the ground invasion is due to pressure from the United States, which there's some indications of, we have some indication of that from statements made by the Americans, and even from some statements made from Israeli officials, including the defense minister, who said last week that the allowance of humanitarian aid into Gaza was at the insistence of the Americans. And I'll explain that in a moment, why Israel would have been resistant to allow humanitarian aid in. We'll talk about that in a sec. But we see that the United States of America, the administration of the U.S., has inserted itself, or been allowed to insert itself by the Israelis, into the strategic and tactical decision-making of Israel, which I find very concerning. I think it's something that we should all be worried about. We need America's support, but the United States' interests and Israel's interests are not necessarily identical. I think in the big picture they are the same, but again, all political opinions expressed by me are my own. They shouldn't reflect on Judy unless she wants them to. But I fear what's going on with this administration and its relationship to Israel. I want to talk about that a little bit to give you my take on the political lay of the land, which I think is very problematic. Most of my fellow Israelis, the vast majority of my fellow Israelis, don't follow U.S. politics to the level of the minutia, to the level of the details, as much as I do. I have a lot of involvement in American life and with American leaders, so I pay very close attention to U.S. politics. And in the early days of this war, President Joe Biden made a speech in support of Israel. It was a beautiful speech, and very sensitive speech. And throughout the Israeli media, there was universal praise for the speech. They were talking about what a lover of Israel President Joe Biden is. And I understood that sentiment. Israel's hurting, and Israelis tend to be, and I've lived in Israel for 30 years. Despite the fluency of my English because of how I was raised, I'm very much Israeli. I've lived in Israel most of my life, raised my kids there. But But one thing that I think Israelis are overly eager to accept words of love and praise, and that often clouds our vision about what's going on at the policy level. And at the time of that speech, it was just a few days into the war, and the Israeli media was praising Joe Biden. I put out an opinion piece and also released a video where I basically was skeptical. And I said that in short order, we're going to find that the US government is going to be getting involved in Israel's strategic decision making, and that's not going to be to our benefit. And here we are. And so I don't know to what extent. I'm not in the Situation Room with the military brass, so I don't know to what extent U.S. interests, or as this administration sees U.S. interests, I don't know to what extent that's influencing Israel's decision about when and how to go in on the ground. But unfortunately, it seems pretty clear that it is affecting it. And the reason I find that so concerning is that since coming into office, the Biden administration has weakened its own relationships with Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, who had become friends of Israel, and thereby weakened Israel's relationship with those countries. They've strengthened their relationship with Iran. Iran and the US have been involved in a long negotiation where the Biden administration is trying to restart the nuclear deal with Iran that from the beginning, from when Obama started talking about it back in 2014, from the beginning, the Israeli government has always unequivocally said that this deal is terrible for Israel, and yet the Biden administration persists in moving forward on it. In January 2022, President Biden declared Qatar and I think this is exactly what he said, quote, a major non-NATO strategic ally of the United States. Now let's understand something about the Kingdom of Qatar, or the Emirate of Qatar. I don't know what their official name is. Qatar openly funds Hamas. They're the second largest funder of Hamas behind Iran. And they continue to fund Hamas to this day. And they are an ally of this administration. I don't know if they're an ally of the United States before and after this administration, but this administration sees them as a partner and as an ally. After visiting Israel about a week into the war, the Secretary of State of the United States, Antony Blinken, visited in Israel. He made a beautiful speech in the Knesset, which again gave Israelis warm, fuzzy feelings. And then he immediately flew to Qatar to meet with the leaders of Qatar. And I think that the alignments of this current U.S. administration and the relationships that they've been developing in the Middle East ever since they went into office have enriched and emboldened Iran and Qatar. The Iranian regime has been able to sell their oil, which they were not allowed to do under the Trump administration sanctions. And this administration has eased those sanctions. Everyone knows about the $6 billion that the U.S. unfreezed, $6 billion in Iranian assets that they unfreezed, that made the papers. But that's really a pittance compared to what they did before, which is by lifting sanctions on Iranian oil, it allowed Iran to sell its oil to European nations and enrich them to the tune of billions of dollars. And we know that the money that Hamas uses for its terror comes from Iran for the most part. So in the big picture, there are some serious causes for concern in terms of the relationship between the US administration and Israel. And one might think to argue, as some have argued, that maybe these attacks made the administration change their approach. But in the speech that Joe Biden gave, that beautiful speech that everyone in Israel was praising, when he was decrying the atrocities of the attacks by Hamas, at no point in that speech did he call out Iran. He didn't mention Iran even once. And that's obviously deliberate. Sometimes what politicians don't say is as important as what they say. It's often more important than what they say, because you can really see who they're trying to avoid offending. And if the US is avoiding calling out Iran and avoiding calling out Qatar for their funding of Hamas at this time, then I'm going to lay down a very dark prediction But I'm not on this call to just tell you all the good stuff and tell you we're going to win. I'm here to give you a briefing as I see it. Unfortunately, considering those relationships that the Biden administration has with Iran and Qatar, and considering how they haven't been willing to criticize either of them since this began, I don't see how down the road, when Israel starts destroying Hamas, if God willing we do, but if Israel is destroying Hamas to the point of no return, and the Iranians and the Qataris who invest billions of dollars in Hamas object and want Israel to move to a ceasefire, and are pressuring Israel to not finish the job through the United States, I don't see how the United States is not going to at least try to satisfy the Qataris and the Iranians, considering that they're not even willing to criticize them for funding terrorism. So that's on the international political front. Just a little bit of my take on where we are, and it's, let's be frank, it's a very perilous situation for Israel. Even though the atrocities and attacks in Israeli towns are over, they took place a few weeks ago, and there are still rockets flying, and one might think that there isn't an existential threat to Israel anymore, and now it's just about the Israelis exacting revenge or justice, or however people interpret what we're doing, and I'll get to that in a moment. I want to talk more about that. We have to understand that there's a very real existential threat to Israel right now. And that existential threat has to do with the fact that Hezbollah up north on our northern border has started to get more active. It's just on the news literally a few minutes ago in Israel. I was looking at what's called in Hebrew mivzakim, which are these, what's the English word? Breaking news headline items from Israel just from...
Hi, this is David. Can you hear me?
From
Hang on a second.
okay, I'm sorry. Could you mute yourself, please? Could you mute yourself, please? From half an hour ago, a headline in the Israeli news that that a group of Hezbollah attempted infiltrators were just neutralized. They were just done away with on the northern border. So things are heating up on the northern border, and if Israel is fighting a two-front war with Hezbollah getting into the game, it's going to make things much more difficult and much more perilous for Israel. This is a very, very dangerous time. And if the United States is trying to play both sides and coddling our enemies while at the same time being our friend, so to speak, I think it's a very dangerous time for Israel. My personal opinion, although this is at odds with the position of the Israeli government, my personal opinion is that the Israeli government should be refusing U.S. aid at this time, because the aid provided to Israel is still only about 5% of Israel's military budget. That doesn't mean that it's a 5% that we can easily spend, but I think that I would rather the Israeli government dug deep, and even if our economy hurts for a bit while we're in the war, I think that the leverage that the U.S. government ends up expressing in decision making, in critical decision making that Israel has to make, as a result of the fact that they're investing in the war with us, and they have some of their military leadership in Israel working with Israel. I think that what they bought with their aid ends up endangering Israel at this moment. So that's my own take, and I'm saying straight out that that's at odds. The Israeli government is still officially in favor of aid, financial aid, but I think that it is not an anti-Israel position to say that the U.S. That it would be better for Israel if the U.S. was not involved. I say that with a very heavy heart. I just don't trust this administration to have Israel's best interests at heart, considering that every policy pretty much implemented by this administration since it came into office has benefited Israel's enemies and weakened Israel. So again, I think we're in a very perilous situation. Now, the situation, there was a question here. There's a few issues that I said that I would get to, right now in this. But I want to talk about the hostages. There was a number of questions on this list here about the hostages. But what's the situation of the hostages? So I want to answer that. One question was, why is Joe Biden only talking about American hostages? And what do we know about the Israeli hostages? And we know that there's a lot of talk about the hostages. Like one of the questions here is, what's happening with the Israeli victims? Are they identified? Or that's actually about those who were killed. Someone asked about the hostages. And right now in Israel, there are public demonstrations by the families of hostages. But the hostage situation is a very complex issue in terms of the war, because this war is not about the hostages. This war is about an existential threat to Israel. The existential threat to Israel of this war is not just if Hezbollah enters the war. The reason that Israel must eradicate Hamas, and this is an important talking point for, if you're going fishing with a friend, if you're standing at the water cooler at work, or if it's a social media post, everyone thinks that they're not an influencer. Every single one of you is an influencer. You have people in your life who you talk to. And this is a very important point for the weeks and days ahead. So in the weeks and days ahead, Israel, as it increases its military action to eradicate Hamas, and the spin machine has already begun in the media about Israel's disproportionate response, and Israel is going overboard, and let's move towards a ceasefire, and let's move towards de-escalation. I'm sitting here in Canada. I've been here for a few days, and the Canadian media is very left-wing. And I turned on the news a couple nights ago when I first got to Canada, and there was a news story about the war, and they put up a graphic which showed that there were 1,400 Israelis murdered in the Hamas attacks, and then they put a number next to it of like some number over 5,000 Palestinians have been killed so far by the Israelis in the airstrikes. Now, I don't know how they get that number. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's not even the point. Even if it's true, it's not. I doubt it's true, but even if it's true, it's not the point. And they were just looking at the numbers, as though proportionality in warfare is determined by how many people each side kills, which is incorrect. It's incorrect in terms of just war doctrine, and it's incorrect according to international law, according to the Geneva Conventions. As Israel proceeds in this prosecuting this war in the next few days and weeks, however long it goes, there's going to be a lot of chatter in the media trying to get Israel to back off. And what the world must understand, and what you must understand to make our case, is that the imperative of destroying Hamas is not only a moral imperative, because Hamas essentially, as we talked about last week, Hamas has the same ideology and the same origins and the same goals as ISIS and Al-Qaeda. That's what this is. These are not freedom fighters seeking Palestinian independence. Hamas charter, as we talked about, calls for genocide of the Jews, not just the destruction of the state of Israel. And they raise, and this relates to another question that was asked, they raise their children to view murdering Jews as a high value. Children's TV shows on television in Gaza teach children like with Muppets, like from a young age, about murdering Jews. It's crazy to think about, and it seems surreal, but that's the ideology. So remember that Hamas is not a rogue terrorist group. Hamas is the government of the Gaza Strip. They control the education system. Hamas controls the education system. They control the infrastructure. Someone's not muted. Please mute yourself. The reason that Israel must destroy Hamas is that if Hamas is left standing as a viable entity at the end of this war in any way, both either as a political entity or certainly in power, certainly as a military entity, but if they remain standing as an entity, they will declare victory because they accomplished what their goal is. They murdered and terrorized the Jews, and they got away with it, and they're still here. And the signal that will send to the other enemies of Israel, both the terrorist groups that are operating in the West Bank, as well as our enemies on our borders, such as Hezbollah and the Iranians who operate out of Syria these days, the message it will send them will be devastating for Israel's security in the long term. and the short term. So Israel must, as a military objective, eradicate Hamas. Now, in this information war that we're in, and thank you, Judy, for this initiative you're talking about breaking people up into teams and fighting the information war. It's exactly what we need. The Christian world, the non-Jewish world of those who stand alongside Israel, has something that the Jewish people will never have, and that's numbers. And the information war requires numbers. And the information war is not separate. When it comes to Israel's wars, the information war is not at all separate from the military war. It's a flank in the military war. It provides backing for the military to be able to do its job. Public opinion is going to matter a lot. As I said last week, if Hamas is a bunch of freedom fighters, we lose. But if Hamas is ISIS, which they are, they come from the same origins, same teachers, the same mentors, the same sources. Hamas is understood by the public. Someone's not muted, please mute yourself. So, if Hamas is understood properly to be who they are, there we go. If Hamas is understood to be ISIS, then as they are, then that's an important win for us, because it allows public opinion to stay firmly with Israel as we eradicate them. So these are very important battles. But in the months and days ahead, or weeks and days ahead, however long this goes, there's going to be a lot of talk in the media about proportionality. And I know I'm talking to military veterans, so you might know this already, but it's worth repeating. The concept of proportionality in warfare, which I mentioned before, that I want to drill down on now, proportionality in warfare does not mean if you kill one, I kill one. That's absurd and it's childish. This isn't a hockey game. Proportionality in warfare means that the actions that are taken militarily are proportional to the military objective. A good way to think about this is, imagine you're a cop and you're arresting a criminal, or you're stopping a criminal from being engaged in violent crime. Whether or not your behavior towards that criminal is proportional has only to do with your goal of stopping them from perpetrating the crime. And whatever you need to do to get them to stop, to stop them, is proportional. So for example, if you can stop them without killing them, then killing them is disproportionate. That has nothing to do with what they did. It has to do with the objective you have, and your objective is to stop the crime. If you go beyond what you need to do to stop the crime, that's what's called disproportionate. So again, proportionality is proportional to the military goal. Now, of course, the military goal has to be a goal that is just, that is righteous. Military goal can't be genocide, of course. So in this case, the way the media is talking about proportionality is what I said to you that I saw on the Canadian news. They're talking about how many Jews were killed in the terrorist attacks, and now look at how many people the Israelis have killed. Or they show all the rubble in Gaza, and it's much worse than the physical damage done to the Israeli towns in the south, and they say it's disproportionate. That's absurd, it's childish, and has nothing to do with just warfare doctrine or international law. So again, the Geneva Convention states that proportional response in warfare is a response that is proportional to the military objective. The military objective here is the complete eradication of Hamas. And any action that is required to eradicate Hamas and is necessary for that eradication of Hamas is a legitimate. Okay, can someone, whoever's not muted, please mute yourself. Is a legitimate and legal act. So there's going to be a lot of talk of war crimes and disproportionality. I wanted to bring up this point to arm you for those conversations about what the true definition of proportionality is. It's very important in this information war. I'm also going to reiterate what I said last week. Last week we shared out a video about Hamas. What is Hamas? It's very important to keep sharing that video, because it really is a very succinct way of letting people know who Hamas is. Now, in that video, we also talked about something that was asked on the question. So I'm dealing with another question that's on the list this week about how is it that Hamas came to power? And let me just read exactly what it says here. Why was Hamas voted in? Why do the Palestinians want them? There was another question right before that. these are two questions on the list that Judy sent me today. Is Hamas in control of the Palestinian people in Gaza? Can they vote them out if they want to? Now, Hamas came to power in 2006 by being democratically elected as the majority of the Palestinian legislature. That's not just the legislature of Gaza, but of the Gaza and the West Bank, which at the time were still under the same governing control of the Palestinian Authority. But at that point, Hamas became the majority of the legislature. Because Hamas is so popular, and the Palestinians know full well what Hamas's ideology is. Because Hamas is so popular, that's the reason why the Palestinian Authority, even though they're supposed to have elections every 4 years, has not had an election ever since. Because they know that if there's another election, Hamas is going to become even stronger because Hamas is extremely popular among the Palestinian people. According to polling done by the Washington Institute, an American research institute, the majority of Palestinians prefer Hamas over the Palestinian Authority as their leaders and have a favorable view of Hamas. This is polling done a few months ago in July 2023, and that's not only in Gaza. You might think that maybe people in Gaza are afraid to tell the truth because they live under the thumb of Hamas, so they're going to lie and say that they support Hamas. But the polling numbers of support for Hamas in East Jerusalem, where Palestinians live freely in the state of Israel and can express whatever they want, are just as high. The support for Hamas is just as high in that population as it is in the Gaza Strip. This is a reality we have to face. We have to look it in the eye and understand that we're dealing with a population that is supportive. When the Hamas terrorists when they came back into Gaza City with hostages on October 7th, they were met with cheering crowds who were just cheering for them, who were celebrating the attacks. So when one asks, how did they get elected? Why did the Gazan people elect them? The simple answer is they elected them because they agree with them. I know that's a hard thing to swallow, but I think this speaks to a spiritual dimension of the war that we've talked about, but it's worth repeating. And I don't want to leave this call without sharing a spiritual side to what's happening here, because this also speaks to a question. One of the questions that I was asked on last week's list, which I didn't get to, was how do we make sense of this emotionally? And I think the way we make sense of this emotionally is by not making sense of it emotionally. Here's what I mean. The way we make sense of it emotionally is by getting our heads around where we are up here. Because emotionally, as good people, as good moral people, I don't think we can ever get to a point where it makes sense to us that people think and behave this way. Let's remember that the Hamas terrorists who did what they did on October 7th, the reason that we have all seen video footage of the atrocities they committed is that they proudly uploaded videos of what they were doing to social media. You know, the Nazis who ran the concentration camps in World War II were trying to hide what they were doing from the world. These Hamas guys, they really believe that what they're doing is, by murdering and raping Jews in Israel, that they're doing this holy act, and they proudly uploaded it to social media. Think about that. So emotionally speaking, if we're trying to kind of make sense of it, that's not a place I ever want to go. But what I think we need to make sense of emotionally is that when we're staring evil in the face, we have to reject all manner of moral relativism. We live in a world where moral relativism reigns supreme. We live in the postmodern era, and we've been so conditioned to be sensitive to all different viewpoints that we can end up softening our resolve in the face of evil. We think back to generations that came before us who fought evil and had a clear understanding and a clear confidence and conviction that they were on the side of good, and that part of the job of being good is the eradication of evil when it rears its ugly head. That's a clarity that I think we need to get to, and I'm not sure we are there. When people call for de-escalation and they call for a ceasefire because of humanitarian concerns, that is coming from a place of not fully accepting the responsibility to defeat evil. Because if we allow evil to persist, if we would allow Hamas to remain a functioning entity and to remain in power, and we're doing that in order to prevent escalation, because we can't handle that, then we are turning away from our responsibility to eradicate evil. The United States in World War II, fighting the Germans and fighting the Imperial Japanese Army, and although as a Jew, the focus of World War II, when we think about it, is always the Holocaust, but anyone who studies the Pacific Theater, as I'm sure many of you have, know that the atrocities committed by the Japanese to the surrounding peoples there in the Far East were really on par with what the Nazis were doing to the Jewish people. It's really quite something how evil that Imperial Japan was. And the only way to defeat both Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan was to bring them to their knees. Unfortunately, that's the only language evil understands. And the German people were changed as a result of that, but they had to be brought to their knees. They had to be defeated. And the Japanese as well. Imperial Japan had to be defeated. And I think that's when I think about making sense of this emotionally and what where we need to get to spiritually as a civilization and as people, as God-fearing people, we have to recognize that the book of Proverbs says that there's a time for peace and there's a time for war. And that means that there is a time for war. And if we slink away from war when the time for war arrives, then that means that we don't really have the conviction to destroy evil. So I think we're in a very serious moment right now. This is an inflection point for our civilization and for us. We have to recognize what our responsibility is in this moment. I know I'm kind of rambling, but I hope I'm helping answer some of these questions and deal with it. Now, one question here was, what would a ceasefire do to Israel in the region right now? I think I've answered that question. That a ceasefire at this point really is defeat for Israel. Question of, what does the Bible say about going to war? What the Bible says is that there are many passages in the Bible that talk about going to war, especially in the book of Psalms. There's a number of Psalms that are about going to war. 2 Psalms that I've been recommending to people, and I've recommended them to you guys in the past few weeks, are Psalm 20 and Psalm 83. They're both about going to war. And I think if you want to know what the Bible says about going to war, just read those Psalms. And that is that, going to war is a necessity when evil rears its ugly head, and the defeat of evil is our responsibility. I think that's, in short, what the Bible says about going to war. Someone asked the question, why won't the Arab countries take in the Palestinians? Now, this is not a question I can answer. I'm not qualified to answer it. It's not a question being posed really to me. It's a question for the Arab countries. So all I could really do is speculate why they don't accept them. Now, after the State of Israel was founded, and there were initially Palestinian refugees who were displaced as a result of the war, mostly as a result of the fact that the Arab legions thought that they were going to wipe out the fledgling State of Israel, and they, over the radio, told Arab residents to flee while they came in and wiped out the Jewish state, and then they could return to their homes. But unfortunately for them, that never happened. That's what really created the refugee problem, going back to 1948, and created things like the Gaza Strip. Why Egypt at that point didn't allow Gazans to move into Egypt proper, why in the refugee camps that were controlled by Jordan in the West Bank, why didn't the Jordanians allow Palestinians to leave the refugee camps and assimilate into the larger society, which they didn't? Why they did that, there's a lot of speculation. Many people speculate that it was for political reasons, that the longer the refugee camps existed, the more pressure there would be on Israel, which is true. And maybe that's the chickens coming home to roost today, that we still have this problem. But why they won't accept them, they don't want to help solve this problem. They're not looking to assimilate new immigrants into their societies, and they certainly don't want immigrants that have been radicalized by being raised in schools that teach them, to be jihadis. You have countries like Jordan and Egypt that have been westernizing and have been becoming more moderate and have tacit or explicit peaceful relationships with Israel and cooperative relationships with Israel, the last thing they want is a bunch of ISIS-trained and educated jihadis moving into their nation. So to a certain extent, I can't blame them for not wanting these people. But I think as Americans, you should also be lobbying your congressmen and your senators to not allow them to come to the United States either, because there are voices on the left in the US now that are arguing that the US should take in these refugees. And I'm just saying this to you. I have no skin in the game on this. I don't live here, but I think that it's something that you should be aware of, that with all the other problems of immigration and mass illegal immigration that have been plaguing the United States for the last few years, I don't think that's something that the US needs, but that's not really my topic. So I know I'm just talking, I'm addressing questions. Just at the last few minutes before I have to go, and I'm sorry, like I said, I have to leave early. I have another meeting coming up that I have to get to. But I just want to talk for a moment about an issue that people do talk about when they talk about this whole issue, which is the Palestinian claim to the land. And just, I know I'm only going to do this for a few minutes, but I think, a short, precise answer is necessary, and we could drill down on this more next time and talk about the larger historical issues, because people, one of the things we talk about besides the day's headlines is what are the bigger issues here. Did the Israelis come from somewhere else and take Palestinian land? So it's important to note that there was never in history a state, a nation called Palestine, Palestinians. In fact, before 1948, before the State of Israel was formed, and it was really the British who had started calling the area Palestine in the modern times. Before that, most European nations just simply called it the Holy Land, and that whole region, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Israel, didn't really have borders. It was just like this large territory that was part of the Ottoman Empire until World War I. There was never an Arab people that called themselves Palestinians. In fact, before 1948, I was just mentioning, the only people who referred to themselves as Palestinians were the Jews who lived in the land. They called themselves Palestinians, and the Arabs who lived there just simply called themselves Arabs. It wasn't until the 1950s that the Arabs living in that area started referring to themselves as Palestinians. But the key point about land, about land claims, is that there's two types of ownership. I'll try to do this in a couple minutes. There's two types of ownership. If I own my own home, okay, so my own home is owned by me, but it's also under the sovereignty of the State of Israel, right? So anything, like if you own your own home, let's say you live in Arkansas, you have your property, but your property is also part of the state of Arkansas. It's kind of like two levels of sovereignty: your own private ownership sovereignty, and then there's the sovereignty of the state. So if you're driving down the highway and there's just empty territory off to the side of the road, it doesn't belong to anyone privately, it's just state land, right? It's just part of the state. So because there was never any nation called Palestine, and if we go back in time, just a quick history lesson, Israel controls the West Bank and the Gaza Strip now, although they haven't annexed them. But no other nation lays claim to them, meaning Egypt doesn't claim the Gaza Strip, Jordan doesn't claim Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. Okay, so who owned them before Israel? Well, they were in the territories of Jordan and Egypt. They were under the control of Jordan and Egypt between 1948 and 1967, although they never became part of those nations, and they don't lay any claim to them today. Before 1948, from World War I until 1948, they were governed by the British. They were governed by the British, but the British were just given a mandate by the League of Nations to govern them until it was decided what to do with them. So they don't have any claim to them. Before the British, they were part of the Ottoman Empire, which lasted for centuries and centuries. Now we're already getting back towards the Middle Ages. If we want to keep going, we can keep going through the various empires, whether it was during the Crusades or the Mamluks or the Byzantines. We can keep going back to the Roman Empire. There has always only been foreign entities that came in and governed the area. There was never an independent state called Palestine. The only nation state, local nation state that had a nation in the land of Israel before the Jewish people established the state of Israel in 1948 was the Jewish people in the temple times. In between, it was always foreign entities governing it. Why does this matter legally? What it means is that when Palestinians claim, when Arabs claim that the territory of the land of Israel is their national homeland, that's simply a false statement. They could have private ownership of pieces of property that were acquired over the centuries, whether it was hundreds of years ago or 20 years ago, it doesn't matter. But there was never a sovereign entity called Palestine that they could say this is Palestinian land. So it's simply a legal fiction to call it that way. What that means in real terms is that we have no problem with every Palestinian having full private ownership rights and living a prosperous, peaceful life. But that's not what they want. That's not what they want. They want to destroy us. I'll finish with a one-liner and then I'll say goodbye. A one-liner that our Prime Minister, and this is a good one-liner for you to use when you're talking to your friends about the conflict, because it sticks in people's minds and it makes the case. If Israel's enemies were to put down their weapons tomorrow, there would be peace and prosperity throughout the Middle East. Could you imagine the economic powerhouse that could be created if Israeli ingenuity and investment was coupled with the labor force that the Arab world has that is just screaming for employment and economic growth? Could you imagine how beautiful and how powerful an economic entity a peaceful Middle East could be? If they put down their weapons tomorrow, there would be peace and prosperity throughout the Middle East. But if Israel put down its weapons tomorrow, there would be a Holocaust. And if you doubt that, just look at what happened 3 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago on October 7th. If Israel put down its weapons, there would be a Holocaust. If our enemies put down their weapons, there would be peace. And I think that tells you a lot of what you need to know. Again, I'm sorry I didn't get to everything. Let's keep the conversation going, keep the questions coming in, and God willing, we'll do this again next week. So thank you very much. Again, I'm sorry I have to go.
And thank you very much. And go to your next meeting and we'll wrap it up in just a moment here. So I know there was another question. I answered it a little bit, but I'll have Rabbi Wolicki answer it next week. And maybe we'll have more clarity on that next week with Iran and what's going on. So before we close, just want to remind you, whomever wants to take part in the social media war, and you can do it to win prizes. You'll meet new people. It will be, it will be a way to kind of take some action now, and and enjoy doing that and using your creative juices. Please just email me, text me, online. There's an explanation, but we'll have the rules of engagement. We'll put you in teams and we'll get that started next week. So those of you who were not familiar, reach out to me, but we're going to fight this war in social media, through our networks, and we're going to have fun doing it and get creative. So text me, and then next week we're going to start putting you in teams of 5 and give you your rules of engagement and get you going. But I also want to recognize we have Omar here from Israel, and we have Ephraim from Israel and Yosef Harel. Is anyone else here from Israel? We just want to welcome you and wish you peace and just safety for you and your family. And before we go, I would just like to, there's a prayer, and I'm going to read it in English, and it's something we say for our hostages. And I've adopted saying it every day, and I'm going to say it in English. And just so we can keep those hostages in mind, especially, everyone, and the children I don't know why they weren't released first, but that's a whole other thing I was going to ask him too. Okay, so the prayer goes, as for our brothers, the whole house of Israel, who are given over to trouble or captivity, whether they abide on the sea or on the land, on the dry land, may the all present have mercy upon them and bring them forth from trouble to enlargement, from darkness to light, and from subjection to redemption, now speedily and at a near time. So, feel free if anyone wants to do a quick hello. People are still coming in. I know some people are coming out and in. They're getting bumped out. But I want to thank you all for coming. And if anyone wants to just, unmute and say hello or say a few words, please feel free to do so. We have about 6 minutes left. And someone asked, okay, I will send that in an email. All right.
Hello, everybody. You hear me?
Hi, is that Donna?
Yes, Donna. I couldn't get on Zoom, but I got on the phone. So I'm saying I'm praying for everybody in Israel and my brothers and sisters. I'm glad you're doing the weekly sessions. I'm sorry I wasn't able to do the last 2 Zooms, but I saw the recordings. I'm glad that you recorded and then you share it out with everybody else later. Appreciate that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, you will all receive a recording of today. And I'm actually going to stop